I'm back at the Wargaming table. This is another experimental type video. Hopefully it doesn't fizzle out earlier or later. Time to catch up. Go over a grab bag of ideas, things. I did just finish. By the way, I figured out what do I have more than anything else? Paper and pens. Let's see. I just finished listening to another gaming video. Great video, by the way. I won't talk about which particular video because it doesn't matter. That's not really the point I'm going over here. If I do talk about that anything said in that particular video, I will identify it, but that's not the point. The point is I'm going to take this opportunity to say, and I don't know how a better way to do this, but it's just great for me to see all the videos and podcasts being done, and I appreciate everybody's efforts, whether it's about games I like or not, games I play or not, different formats work. It's just great. All the content being created, and by the way, I should say, content being created from rank amateurs like myself, or I should say, I put myself in the same category, all the way to some really old-time grognards. And again, I'll say again, we have everything from reviews to playthroughs, just a commentary to interviews with designers. It's great stuff out there. It goes without saying we need more. But what is out there is great, and it seems to be growing, and that's great. So, on another note, this concept. I will not, I will not mince words here. Clearly, wargamers, and I'm sure gamers, but I'm just thinking about wargamers. Clearly, wargamers have a particular idea of what this word means. In different discussions, whether it's video podcast or video chat, whatever, wargamers clearly have a belief that some games involve tactics more. Sometimes it's couched in teaching terms. Some games teach tactics better than others, I guess, although I don't understand how you can really say a game teaches anything. The teaching process is not going on with any game, period. Although I know there's a soft term of teach. It's not really teach. It's highlight at best some things, whether it's a historical fact or it's something else. Anyways, back to tactics. Tactics, the everyday English definition of tactics, which is a perfectly legitimate definition, is basically any type of focused, detailed plan of action devised to achieve a particular end. And I do think that this is generally the definition that many wargamers are using, as far as I can tell. Yeah, I should emphasize as far as I can tell. I think wargamers should be debating things like what is tactics and what is tactics in wargames more. But the first thing to notice about that everyday language definition of tactics is that it's very similar to strategy, which is actually why strategy and tactics are two terms that can sometimes even be presented as going together, i.e. where you have tactics, you should generally have strategy and vice versa. So it's almost a term, strategy and tactics. And again, there is nothing wrong with this definition. This is actually similar to the ancient definitions of tactics and strategy. And even in the ancient concepts of tactics and strategy, they, I think, as far as I can tell, they were considered to be very closely related, even interrelated terms. But the strategy was that detailed planning to achieve an end done at a certain higher level or echelon, and tactics was very similar but done at a lower echelon. And I think even ancients recognized that while the core concept is similar if not the same, because of the change in echelon, i.e. from the army commander slash emperor slash king, right, down to the battlefield commander, battlefield unit commander. I think even the ancients recognized that in practice these changed at least somewhat as you changed echelon, right? That's all ancient understanding, and these still and those ancient concepts still have they still influence our understanding and use of these terms, strategy and tactics, in an everyday English language sense. Okay, so what I'm getting at with the everyday English language definition of tactics, let alone strategy, we'll get to strategy maybe, but I wanted to start with tactics, is that the everyday English language definition of tactics suggests that every game has tactics. If there is no tactics, it's not a game. It's almost as tactics. It has to do with the broadness of the definition. I'm trying to think of the simplest game. Well, no, I'm not trying to think of the simplest game, but what is a simple game? I'm not even going to turn. Well, what's a good abstract game? What is a good abstract game? All right, I'm going to go back to my standby from many years ago. Not that I played it. My standby. I've used Parcheesi in thinking about games, game design, strategy, tactics, on and on. For some reason, Parcheesi. Well, actually, it's not for some reason. There's actually a very old story behind this, but Parcheesi as the example here, and I obviously I'm not going to make the point here because I wasn't planning on it, but many years ago I thought through a kind of a thought experiment where I asserted that Parcheesi is a game to teach generals how to wage war and wage campaigns. Anyways, the point is only that some very, very, very abstract games can be used as an analog to different things military. So anyways, the point is, wargamers, I think, I should say wargamers who use the everyday English language definition of tactics, which as far as I can tell is a large number. This definition is so broad that it's hard for me to imagine a game, even an abstract game, let alone any game that sells itself as a war game, as not having some aspect of this. Now, understand what I'm saying. To jump over just for a minute to military tactics, which I'm going to get to in a second, which is different than this. If military tactics says you don't take out a bunker by running up to the front aperture and jumping in with your bayonet, to take a completely facetious example, then if a game abstract or otherwise, wargame or otherwise, um, uh, rewards the tactics, not military tactics, but this tactics. If the game rewards that decision and action, i.e., you achieve your specific end by doing that, what I just said, which a game can perfectly do, because a game can do anything. Tactics is still there. It's just the tactics has no correlation to real world for sure, and obviously this tactics has no correlation to military tactics, and that is really the point I'm trying to say. Now, before I get onto the military side, I'm going to say categorically here, a game can be designed to teach military tactics. Ooh, I used the T word. Sorry, that's not what I meant. I fell into that trap too. It's easy to fall into that trap. No. All right, back up. A game can be designed based on military tactics. That can be a design goal, and that design goal can be achieved to varying degrees. I am going to mention MBA, Main Battle Area, a game that, as far as I can tell, as a player of the game, was designed to be based on military tactics. You want to see a game that is, infused with military tactics? Play MBA. And many game players, I think, are going to say it's not a very fun game, possibly. And of course, I would say there's a correlation. Why should military tactics be fun? It could be fun, could not be fun. I mean, I find MBA fun, but obviously, we won't even talk about the subjectiveness of fun. But so to clarify before moving on, yes, a game can be designed based on military tactics, but a game can be designed in any way and can be a hugely fun game, popular game, deep game, deep levels of tactics and in fact strategy, and have no relationship to military tactics, war, military history, or anything. Should that not be fairly obvious? Now, one more thing about the everyday language definition of tactics. Some everyday language, English language definitions of tactics even use the word strategy in it, which confuses the matter somewhat, at least. But, in fact, for everyday language purposes, it's certainly not incorrect, because strategy and tactics, again, everyday English language definitions are interrelated. They're really two, again, echelons of the same thing. Just like in the ancient world, writers talked about tactics and strategy, and they generally talked about them being interrelated, the difference being the echelon of execution, I guess. Okay, so again, if a game pretty much, frankly, it's hard for me to imagine a game that doesn't have tactics in it. And likewise, it's hard for me to imagine a game that doesn't have strategy. Now, yes, we could kind of ease over into gambling and other games of chance. I wasn't really going to go there, although we could widen the discussion to that. Anyways, I just found this interesting because some recent discussion I heard seemed to suggest to wargamers that, or seemed to suggest that some wargamers are going to hold up certain games as great war games because they have, I'm not even sure what the right word is, because they have a lot of tactics in it. That, I mean, there's some type of disconnect here, because again, an abstract game can be intense, can be, involve in intensive tactics. That has nothing to do with military tactics or anything military. All right, so before we go on to this, before we go on to this, I guess I'll, what's the word? By way of disclosure, I guess. That sounds so legalistic, doesn't it? So as a military officer, as an infantry officer, I did a lot of military tactics, not the everyday language concept I was just talking about, or definition I was just talking about. And now, having done a lot of military tactics as an Army officer, infantry officer, I'm now a strategist by functional area, specialty, which I can say, not only by functional area, but by training, I am an Army strategist. But needless to say, Army strategy, national security strategy has, virtually nothing to do with, again, the everyday language definition. I'll make this the everyday English language definition of strategy. Again, military strategy, Army strategy, national security strategy, etc. has essentially nothing to do with the everyday English language definition of this word. A while ago, I did I just thought I would experiment. I went on Google. I typed in strategy, and I decided I thought it would be instructive to see what comes up. This was quite a while ago. It's actually a couple of years ago. Two things were instructive. First, when all those Google results came back, I scrolled down, and I think it was only the third or fourth entry. I was looking for, in the little, Google search results, little preview pieces of language they have underneath the keyword or whatever. I was looking for the first result that clearly was using this word, and then I went to it. First instructive thing, what I could find is the first clear-cut use of this word in a Google results search was some person's blog about how their child was working on a strategy to get into college, which is fine. I mean, that is a perfectly legitimate use of the everyday English language definition of strategy. That's great. That's fine. You can even talk about that child's tactics about getting into college, right? The tactics is maybe scoring as high as possible on some particular test, right? The strategy might be to, spend summer visiting admissions administrators or whatever. You can talk about that. It's perfectly fine. But that's all everyday English language use of these terms, words. The other instructive thing I found with just using this Google search to see what I come up with on this word, sorry, not concept, word, is that page after page after page of Google results had nothing to do with military strategy, national security strategy, national defense strategy, none of it. Campaign strategy, i.e. military campaign strategy, nothing to do with that. It overwhelmingly, the results were strategy in a business context, which, by the way, makes perfect sense. We are essentially a business society. We are a mercantilist society. Not mercantilist narrowly defined, but we are a market society. We are a free market society. Our culture, our worldview, our form of government, it's all based on economy. We are an economic nation, somewhat of an economic empire. Is perfect, again, for the everyday English language definition of strategy, perfectly understandable that it should figure so prominently in that context. But of course, for a military strategist like me, it helps me not at all. No, I'm not going to say not at all. It helps me very, very little. And don't even approach the subject of whether business strategy writings can help a military strategist, because I'm definitely not on that bandwagon. All right, so let's get to then we get to try this again. Tactics in the military context. Again, the point is military tactics, which it hardly seems worth it to give the military definition, since it has virtually nothing to do with games, period, and it has very little to do with even so many war games. Again, I'm talking about military tactics. This tactics can be fascinating, by the way. The everyday English language definition of tactics. This can be fascinating. This is fascinating. Even to me, this is fascinating. You want to talk about tactics in, I don't know, playing a card game. You want to talk about tactics in, a political campaign, a debate, preparing for a political debate, and executing a political debate. So this is tactics as an abstract concept. Can be fascinating, and I'll even go so far as to say, to like emphasize that I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to sound a platitude here. I'm not trying to sound a platitude. When I studied nuclear strategy, a lot of the writings that I was a lot of the research I was doing. When I was studying nuclear strategy, a lot of the research I was doing was in the area of abstract strategy, game theory, which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I wholeheartedly recommend everybody, explore game theory, strategy as that abstract concept. And again, understand, if you want to now talk about strategy as that abstract concept, we're talking about maximizing choices, maximizing decisions based on trade-offs, right? Based on outcomes. Fascinating. But this also applies to, again, this has nothing specifically to do with anything military. This has to do with, again, this goes back to, you can apply the abstract concept of strategy to getting into the best college. Getting into the best college is your goal, and you can use. I'm not saying it's very useful. Maybe you just want to study and get the best grade. All right. But you can apply. Abstract strategy, and you can go through and you can list all these possible outcomes. Everything from I am accepted to and begin as a student at this institution, all the way to all these other institutions. You can grade them. You can talk about, again, the strategy of getting of winding up in the highest point on your list, the highest slot on your list. You can talk about that, and it is fascinating. And again, when I was studying nuclear strategy, the abstract concept of strategy as maximizing, payoffs and decision making, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Game theory, which is really just the whole science in a soft sense, but the whole theory of basically contested decision making is fascinating. And incidentally, did have some utility in national security making. Not to equate the two, not to make the mistake of equating the two, but game theory did, it both did and it can inform national security decision making. And to the extent that game theory, game theory, jumps over and links to national security strategy is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. It's fascinating. It's real. Again, what does that have to do with games and war games? Not clear. I'll just say it's not clear. But so back to, you want to talk about tactics and you want to talk about war games. Do you really want a war game that's based on tactics? Military tactics. Because we can have all sorts of fun war-themed games that have tactics, but not military tactics. This is almost possibly a source of a lot of confusion. Yeah, but so bottom line, just because a game that is war themed is in fact incredibly rich in the depth of its tactics, has nothing to do with a connection to either military tactics, military operations, or simply the real world. And all of this is not to suggest that that some of the most popular war games are devoid of tactics. That's not what I'm trying to get at. What I am trying to get at is that if a war game is based more and more and more on military tactics, does not mean that it becomes more and more popular and people will play it. And again, this goes back to, why do we play war games? I have heard comments, and I'm talking about comments, some written, but I'm actually keying more in on comments I've heard in videos and podcasts, that comments that suggest that how to put it, gamers are enthralled with a so-called tactical war game, and they think it's fun, which is all, neither right nor wrong. It just is, right? They experience a lot of tactics in the game, which again is probably true. Let's take Starfleet Battle. I think Starfleet Battle. I probably should talk about a game I've played, but I'm not going to talk about it. Unfortunately, I'm going to talk about Starfleet Battles, which I haven't actually played yet. But from what I've read, this is a great example of what I mean by tactics. Starfleet Battles is basically a set of rules. The pieces, of course, are only mnemonics to exercise and quote-unquote play by the rules, right? And the depth of the rules, mechanics, and interaction gives it a rich imparts a rich experience of tactics, and yet it has nothing to do with space, nothing to do with lasers, nothing to do with military tactics, nothing to do with anything. It's a self-contained set of rules, and because of how it's designed, I'm not suggesting that it's like random or anything. I'm saying that the rules are set up in such a way that that to again play, to quote unquote play by the rules, to win as defined by the rules takes careful and deliberate action to achieve a goal, which, remember, is the everyday English definition of this word, right? So that's why a game like Starfleet Battles can be rich in this, but it's the everyday English language, again, definition of this, which incidentally, as a form of mental exercise, can be deeply both intellectually satisfying and also it can be entertaining. The everyday language of this, basically being better at exploiting this in a game as portrayed and given by the game to beat opponents, to beat opponents can be a satisfying experience. Can give a lot of satisfaction, especially for some gamers. Not really me, since I seem to never play to win. But for a lot of gamers, that is the enjoyable experience, and that is what gives the illusion of military tactics. It's not an illusion of tactics, kind of the abstract concept, which is also the everyday English language definition I began with. That's real, but it gives the illusion of military tactics. If you understand there's real military tactics and then there's that abstract tactics, and if there is a lot of one-to-one correlation between the two, which is perfectly possible, there's nothing that says that can't be done. It can be done. But the interesting question to ask is why our most popular games are not based on much military tactics at all. That's really the question. And I know I'm not going to say it, but I know some people I talk with will immediately say the reason is because military tactics isn't necessarily very easy. It's not necessarily very fun, and it does not correspond to any of our entertainment views of combat and war, i.e., our popular games are based on popular notions of war and combat, and they have tactics, abstractly speaking, and they therefore they're designed to be fun. They're designed to be fun, they're designed to be entertaining, and they're designed to be challenging. Really, those are the games that are really that make up our top 200 war games. I mean in entirety, but the overwhelming majority of the top 200, probably on Board Game Geek right now, are emphasizing that, and not emphasizing military tactics. Because a designer can say, I'm going to design this game based on military tactics. And, popularity and sales be damned, right? All right. So I went way down a much more narrow train of thinking than I thought I would. yeah, I think that's probably enough for now, but let me make sure I didn't leave anything make sure I don't need to tie up any loose ends. I really appreciate what seems to be expanding player content widely available, i.e. through the internet, videos, podcasts, etc. Many discussions I'm listening to, wargamers as a group are broadly using this word in the everyday English language definition of this term. Whereas for me, I'm always going to, I will always keep my military definition of tactics and strategy. And I will clearly, when I'm using, in a wargame context, when I'm using tactics and strategy in a different way, I will try to remember to explain that. This is why I don't refer to tactical war games. Tactical war games is, to me, well, it's misleading at least. I think it's redundant. Tactical war game. I understand people are trying to define tactical war game according to some type of scale and echelon, but that is horribly confusing to the military definition of tactics. And to keep them straight in my mind, I've decided I'm going to keep tactics and strategy by their military definitions for my use, and I'll try to avoid, because I don't want to be using strategy and tactics in more than one manner freely, without at least indicating the context I'm speaking from. What I mean by that is, that's why I say small unit scale or small unit scope war game. Because this idea of a tactical war game, well, I've said enough. It's too confusing for me, and I'm not going to bounce back and forth between military definition and what I clearly call wargamer definition. There's a wargamer definition of a tactical wargame, operational wargame, strategic wargame, which is I will go so far as to say that essentially is a marketing, that goes back to a marketing plan. That goes back to a marketing use of these terms, which is not legitimate enough for my usage. Same goes with this word. In another video, I'll probably talk about the military context for especially this word and this concept. Again, suffice it to say, this in a military context has very little to do with the gaming word. However, it's not to say that strategic theory cannot be brought into a lot of wargame designs. But that's different. Strategic theory is different than strategy. So this is actually very fascinating, but again, does it make a good game? I wonder. No, ultimately, I think this is a fascinating area of study, and no, I don't think that game theory per se makes a good game. I'll say again, MBA is testament to the fact that a designer can deliberately create a game that actually is based on military tactics. Yeah. All right.